welcome back to yet another episode of Ball with Y'all. It's so great to be here with you today on March 23rd, a beautiful Wednesday here in South Florida. We are coming off of a wild weekend in the sports weekend. I always say that, but it was especially wild this past weekend. So hopefully you're ready for yet another full show. As always, I thank you so much for joining us, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Google Podcast, Radio Public, Breaker, joining us on YouTube at BWI Productions, or if you're checking us out via Instagram as well at Ball with Y'all Podcast. So great to get to join you once again for yet another episode, and thank you for sticking around throughout this second season of the show. Like I said, we have a full show on tap for you today. Where are we going? Well, of course, we're in the middle of March Madness. We are only a day away from the beginning of the Sweet 16, with some teams that we expected to be there and some teams that we didn't necessarily expect to be there, with the St. Peter's of the world and the University of North Carolinas and the Iowa States and so on. We'll get into how well I'm doing when it comes to my bracket. I'm pretty proud of my bracket, I must say. How well I'm doing, how well the nation's doing when it comes to their brackets, what's really surprising us, how the SEC is doing, and so on. Then we'll get into, there's a lot of NFL moves right now. A week ago, I sat here and said, okay, Tom Brady coming back, Aaron Rodgers coming back to Green Bay, and Russell Wilson going to Denver. And I said, we should probably see a little bit of the news cycle should die down just a tad, right? Until we get to the draft in about a month, and then we'll start to see it pick back up. I have been proven wrong. Apparently so, because the NFL is still just filled with headlines right now with quarterbacks, wide receivers, and more. We'll get into that, some of our big takeaways. And then we'll wrap up with yet another big weekend in the NASCAR world with William Byron winning this past weekend in Atlanta. We'll talk about what our big takeaway there was, and then also getting into what we think will happen this weekend at the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. So without further ado, let's get into story number one. So story number one, we are in the middle of the tournament, and a week ago I said that I thought my bracket would be horrible. And if you joined us in the Ball with Y'all Productions, I believe it's BWI Productions, ESPN Tournament Challenge bracket group, you see right now that is not the case. In fact, I am doing rather well, and I'm going to take every opportunity right now to brag about how great my bracket is, because I am never right about anything, right? We've talked about this before. I pick a NASCAR driver, he loses, he wrecks, he ends up in this massive accident and just ruins his day. I pick this team to win a game and they lose, or they blow a massive lead. A litany of things, right? I'm always wrong. So all this insight that I give you ends up being wasted, right? Now, for once, I'm right about where this is going. So I'm really excited, and I think I might be able to bring some pretty valuable insight here for a sport that I don't really watch all that much, but I'm starting to understand it a little bit more, right? So my bracket is mostly intact. If you go based off of ESPN's percentage tracker thing, I think I'm doing better than 95.1% of the nation right now. And I haven't gotten everything right. I don't have a perfect bracket by any means, but I had Iowa State beating what was it? Who did they beat? Iowa State. They beat. Was it? No, it wasn't Texas, but they beat a really good team the other night. And then I had Miami beating Auburn. Right, big win there. I had Michigan beating Tennessee. Right, I am in good shape. 3 of my final 4 are still intact. Right, I've got Villanova. They're still there. I got Arkansas. They are still there. I've got Kansas. They are still there. St. Mary's. They failed me, but some people expected that, right? I believe Dano commented on our last episode. He was pretty surprised that I had him going that far. And of course, they didn't make it through the first weekend. But overall, I think I'm in good shape, right? And, comparatively, the SEC is not in good shape when it comes to the basketball world right now. There were 6 SEC teams that entered the NCAA tournament in the form of LSU and Alabama, Tennessee, Auburn, Arkansas, and Tennessee, Arkansas, LSU, Alabama, Auburn, and I'm forgetting the last team. But clearly they lost. Oh, Kentucky. That's a big one to forget. So those 6 teams entered, right? And 1 remains. The Arkansas Razorbacks. And even that one, they're not all that impressive right now, right? They haven't really shocked us. They narrowly escaped in the first round. They did okay in the second round, in the round of 32. And now, of course, they find themselves in the Sweet 16. They have to face off against, I believe, Gonzaga this next game. And if they win there, then they'll have to play the winner of Duke and Michigan State. And then they could find themselves in the Final Four, where I actually have them going to play for a national championship against Kansas. I don't know if they'll get that far, but that's the only SEC team we have right now. And like I said, they're not all that impressive right now either. Now, Kentucky, right? I mentioned them. This is the one I forgot. Kentucky. I don't even know how to quantify what happened there, right? They unprecedented a loss to the 15 seed, a 15 seed that I never heard of, St. Peter's University. Apparently, it's somewhere in New Jersey. I made a comment to a friend of mine after the game. What was it? Thursday night, I believe. Of all the 2 seeds that have ever lost to 15 seeds, Duke has done it before. I believe, was it Baylor did it before as well, to Georgia State. There have been 2 seeds that have lost to 15 seeds. It's not unprecedented, right? But it happens on occasion. I never thought that John Calipari, a team that he coaches, would fall as a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. And they did it pretty quickly, right? A lot of people had them making a championship run, getting into their Final Four, getting into their Elite Eights, and so on, and they couldn't even get it through the round of 64. It's disgusting, right? And it's unacceptable, honestly, for a John Calipari-led team, especially when you think about all the experience that they had throughout that team, right? With guys that were so mature. Normally, especially at Kentucky, you have a lot of guys who are one and done, right? Who don't stay long. Well, you had a little bit of maturity there for Kentucky, which is why people started to buy in. People started to really think this team could do something special, and they fell flat against not that great of a team, right? They're not SEC talent. And still not much of a showing there for the Kentucky Wildcats. Alabama. I believe I said on last week's show, and I repeated it to whoever would ask. I said that Alabama was one of 2 teams. They would either lose in the round of 64 or they would make it to the Elite Eight, right? I said there was no in between. They wouldn't fall somewhere between the Sweet 16 range. No, they would either lose their first game or they would go on a run and almost make the Final Four. It's kind of difficult, though, when your point guard tears his ACL in the first 4 minutes of the game. And he's the best player on the team, and you don't really have much offense beyond him. There's not much you can do, right? And honestly, side note, as an Alabama fan, I just want to make a note that I hate every single ACL ligament that's ever existed, right? I never want to see another ACL because in the past 4 months alone, John Mechie in the SEC championship game against Georgia and Jamison Williams in the national championship game against Georgia, and now here in the first NCAA tournament game of the year for this Alabama Crimson Tide team that beat Gonzaga, that beat Baylor, that beat Houston, that gave Memphis a run for their money, that could have beaten Auburn at one point in time, could have beaten Kentucky. They don't even win their first game because of a torn ACL. I never want to see an ACL ever again in my life. And I understand that technically speaking, we don't really see them unless we see like x-rays and so on. I don't care. I don't want to see an injury like that ever again in the Alabama locker room on any sport, right? Whether it's gymnastics, softball, I'm done with it. I don't ever want to hear about another ACL tear in my lifetime. This has been so frustrating. The span of 120 days where we've seen 3 ACL tears for Alabama athletics in prominent situations has been absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know what's causing that. I don't know if there's like a sports strength conditioning situation that needs to be fixed. I don't know, but it's stupid. It's quite honestly just ridiculous to see how many torn ACLs have happened in the Alabama locker room as of late. Now, going back to the actual basketball itself, Auburn and Tennessee, they both fell apart in the second round, and it was honestly a beautiful sight to behold, right? Rick Barnes, he was a former basketball head coach for Texas at one point in time, and then he made the transition over to Tennessee. And the running joke about Rick Barnes was that he could never really make it big in the tournament. He would do well throughout the regular season, but when he gets to the national tournament, he would fall short. And I believe I saw a stat saying that he's only advanced past the round of 32 maybe 2 or 3 times since 2008, right? And of course, Bruce Pearl for Auburn, historic season for the Auburn Tigers. I believe they started like 25-2 or something ridiculous like that, and they finished the season 6-5, including losses to Texas A&M to end their SEC tournament in their first game. And then they go out there and they beat a subpar Jacksonville State team. All credit to Jacksonville State, but they're not to the level of an SEC program, and then they fall flat to a 10 seed in the form of the Miami Hurricanes. A horrendous finish to a rather historic season if you are an Auburn Tiger fan. And of course, like I mentioned, I called both of those losses. I called Tennessee losing to Michigan, and I called Miami beating Auburn. And oh, what a sweet feeling it was on Saturday and Sunday night, when both of those results went final. Now, as far as the remaining portions of the tournament, if I had to repick the tournament right now, if I had like a second chance bracket, which I believe they might be introducing here over the next couple of days, I'd still go with Villanova. I'd still go with Kansas, and I would still reluctantly go with Arkansas. But instead of my St. Mary's pick, I have to go with the team that beat them. I'll go with UCLA. I'll say UCLA beats North Carolina, and whoever comes out of that bottom side where St. Peter's is, I believe it's St. Peter's and Purdue perhaps, whoever comes out of that side, I say UCLA wins that game and gets to the Final Four to play Arkansas. Arkansas will beat them somehow, some way. Kansas will beat Villanova. They'll face off in the championship, and Kansas will come out victorious once again. Like I said, I still like somehow, some way, Kansas to come out victorious over Arkansas in a couple of weeks. But like I said, we'll see how it unfolds. On to story number 2. So story number 2, the issue that I ran into as the NFL week progressed was that there were so many things happening that I wasn't exactly prepared for, that I really wasn't expecting, right? I was reminded of back in like 2012, 2013, 2014, I was a massive NBA fan, right? I grew up and still am a San Antonio Spurs fan, and they did really well in the mid 2000s. They won an NBA championship in 2003, 2005, and 2007. And then they had a little bit of a lull there where they were a really good team, but they weren't winning championships, mostly because Kobe Bryant existed, and to some extent also because LeBron James existed in the latter part of the 2010, 2011, that kind of ballpark. And then in 2012, 2013, 2014, the Spurs started to become relevant, and I really started to get into NBA basketball, right? I started to love the product, and I started to follow every single player and every single team. I could tell you rosters up and down, right? And it was almost like a renaissance period in the NBA. And it was an incredible time because the NBA was growing. The product was at an all-time high. It wasn't being politicized like what you see now. It was almost like a euphoric moment across the board. But then some things started to happen. Then players started to scatter, right? In the summer of 2014, we saw LeBron James leave to go back to Cleveland, only 4 years after spurring them for Miami. I believe shortly thereafter we saw Dwayne Wade leave to go to Chicago, and then he ultimately ended up coming back to Miami toward the end of his career. Tony Parker, he was a long-time San Antonio Spur, and he went to Charlotte. I believe he actually finished his career in Charlotte, which was a little bizarre as well. A number of other players, they started to scatter across the board, right? Chris Bosh, his career ended due to blood clots. There were a lot of interesting situations. And all these guys that I looked up to and I knew, rosters left and right, they started to scatter, right? And there was this trend of moves, of trades, of people getting released and so on. And the NBA that I knew in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and so on was no longer, right? And fast forward 8 years, right? I mentioned a few weeks ago this game called Wordle, right? And we talked about that Wordle is this game where you have to guess the word, and you have a certain amount of guesses to be able to get the word, and it's based off of what letters are available. It's kind of a combination of Wheel of Fortune and what I referred to as, was it catchphrase? No, not catchphrase. Chain reaction, that kind of idea, right? Where you have a certain amount of letters and you kind of get the idea of what the word is and so on. To that point, Wordle has not gotten any easier, right? Even though I haven't been talking about it, it has not gotten any easier. But there's a bunch of spinoffs about Wordle, right? There is a college football Wordle. It's called CFB Wordle. So if you want to play that, feel free. There are other versions out there. There's Hurdle, which is like a music-based thing, which has been fun. I've done moderately well at that. There's like a Quordle, a Bordle. There's all these other versions basically where You can play multiple Wordles at once. You can play one that's based off of music chords and so on. There's one in particular that I thought I would do really well at, right? It was called Purtle, right? If you're not familiar, there's a current NBA player. I think he plays for the San Antonio Spurs, but I'm not entirely sure because, again, I don't know the rosters. His name is Jakob Purtle, right? And they're like, okay, well, let's make an NBA version of Wordle and call it Purtle because that's his name, and that's perfect, right? And ultimately, the goal is you have 6 guesses or so on to get to the name of the player, and then they tell you, okay, he plays for this team. He's this tall. You make a guess as to what player it is, and he tells you, okay, well, he used to play on the team of that person you just guessed, or he's a little bit taller than that person you just guessed, or he's in the same conference, and so on. A bunch of details about these players. And what I found pretty quickly, because I thought I would do great, I thought I would be incredibly good at Purtle because I was like, oh, I know every single one of the NBA players. But then I came to realize that was 8 years ago when I knew every single one of the NBA players before they scattered and retired and so on. And now I come to find out I don't know any of the players. Or I know the players, but I don't know where they are or who they're playing for. So I don't know the rosters like I once did. And that took away the sport that I came to know and love. The trade frenzy of the mid-2010s and so on, the trade frenzy, the release frenzy, kind of making this like they're the player's own market, if you will. It changed the sport that I'd come to love, right? I still enjoyed NBA basketball until I would say maybe 2019, 2020 or so when things started to go south as far as their product, but that's another story for another day. But I come to fall out of love with it because I just couldn't tell you where these players were anymore, right? And not to be too dramatic, but this week's NFL news reminded me of that feeling that I had when I realized I didn't know any of the players in the NBA anymore. So a number of moves this week. We're not going to go into every single one of them, but some highlights. Deshaun Watson going to Cleveland. Trust me, I have some thoughts on that. Matt Ryan going to Indianapolis, leaving Atlanta. Replacing him in Atlanta is Marcus Mariota, former Heisman Trophy winning quarterback for the Oregon Ducks. Mitch Trubisky going from Buffalo to Pittsburgh. Baker Mayfield, we don't know where he's going because he just lost his job to Deshaun Watson, and we already know he was already on the outs, it looked like, in Cleveland anyway. And then lastly, one that really hurt my soul, and I really didn't know how to react to it. I didn't know what to feel in the moment when I saw the news. But here we are, Devonte Adams leaving Green Bay for the Las Vegas Raiders. A couple big takeaways here. On the Deshaun Watson front, it's really interesting. It's kind of like a curious decision, if you will, because if you recall, Deshaun Watson has some serious allegations against him, right? And I'm not going to go into all the details. Feel free to Google him. That's not the nature of the show. But he's got some serious allegation against him. And I understand that he's been absolved of the criminal side of things. But even when there haven't been criminal charges in the past for guys like, I believe, Ray Rice and Adrian Peterson and so on, they've still gotten suspended by the NFL, right? And who's to say that the NFL won't suspend Deshaun Watson for a full season or for half the season or for even a quarter of the season, right? And if that happens, how worthwhile was your investment here if you're Cleveland? I saw a number where they gave him upwards of $100 million guaranteed, right? And if he gets suspended for any certain amount of games, who's to say that $600,000 or whatever it would cost him to miss those games, he's not going to care because he's rich now because of the guaranteed money that's in his contract as a result of this trade to Cleveland. So if you're Cleveland, a massive gamble, and I don't know if it's going to pay off. I don't entirely know. I don't really care, honestly, but it's really interesting to see because when will he be able to play? There's no guarantee he'll be able to play in September. And I'd be shocked if he'll be able to play in September. I'd be shocked. I wouldn't necessarily know that I'd be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't get to play until 2023. And again, think about the last time you saw Deshaun Watson play football. It was almost 2 years ago now because he didn't play the entire 2021 season. And Deshaun Watson's talented, but can you honestly sit here and say that you think he's one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL? I'd say maybe top 8. But do you really go all in on a guy you have not seen play in quite some time, who's not even in the top 5 of NFL quarterbacks? I don't know. When I saw him at Houston, he had was it DeAndre Hopkins and had an incredible defense with Jadeveon Clowney and J.J. Watt. I thought this guy should have done a lot more than he did. And I understand you're in the same division as the Colts, who are usually pretty good. You're in the same division as the Titans, who all of a sudden are pretty good, right? I get it. The Jaguars also, too, were making AFC championships at certain points in time when he was there in Houston. But still, you had a very high bar to reach there, and you simply did not reach it once for the Houston Texans. So who's to say you're going to be able to do it in Cleveland? Again, it just seems like a pretty substantial reach if you are the Cleveland Browns. But we'll see how that side of things unfolds. As far as the Devonte Adams thing, right? He was apparently offered a substantial amount of money by the Green Bay Packers to come back and play with Aaron Rodgers because they just solidified Aaron Rodgers and they said, okay, we got our guy. We need to make sure that he has his top target. And supposedly, Green Bay offers him a certain amount of money and he turns it down. And it was more than what Las Vegas ended up offering him. And now he goes back to Las Vegas and plays with his college quarterback in the form of Derek Carr. Cool, great storytelling moment, outstanding. But who does Aaron Rodgers throw to now? Okay, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Well, he drops everything that's thrown to him, right? And I apologize if he's listening to me, but still, it's probably not. He's horrible. Alan Lazard is a great talent, but he can't catch everything, right? Randall Cobb's like 45 years old. I don't know how old he is, but he's been in the league for quite some time. And when you're a wide receiver taking all those hits, your career usually doesn't last that long, right? And you don't really have the legs that you once did. I remember when he first came out of college out of Kentucky, he was kind of like a mix of a wide receiver quarterback. And then he ended up getting drafted by the Packers and he was returning punts and so on. He can't do that anymore. So maybe Amari Rodgers out of Clemson a year ago. Okay, cool. But he's in his second year. Who is Rodgers going to throw the ball to? And I know they could still get a Julio Jones as part of the market right now. There's a number of other talented guys that they could potentially go after. But I think this only further cements the issue when it comes to going after guys in the draft, right? We know there are going to be some top receivers in the draft this year. And if you're the Packers, you better be hoping that a receiver drops down to your spot late in the first round because, they did advance pretty far in the playoffs this past year. And you better hope that there's one guy that you can get that'll further supplement Aaron Rodgers' passing attack. Because right now, as it stands right now, it's not looking all that strong. Now, like I said, I thought the NFL headlines were going to die down, and certainly the the many that we've gone through here have shown us that they are far from dying down. And I can imagine we're probably going to see some more over the next few weeks as we lead up to the draft in, I believe, late April. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that, but hopefully, fingers crossed, things start to die down just a tad. On to story number 3. So story number 3, when I was watching the race this past Sunday in Atlanta, right, I had a feeling that a Ford driver would win the race. I thought, okay, I had a feeling it would be Ryan Blaney. I thought, okay, maybe it's Blaney, maybe it's Logano, maybe it's even Cindric, or last week we saw Briscoe do it. Maybe Harvick goes out there and wins, or Almirola, or maybe even Cole Custer, right? Any of the Ford cars. I figured they'd do well in Atlanta. Ryan Blaney did well in Atlanta last year. It just made sense, right? And the Fords have done very well this year too, if you think about it. They, with Joey Logano winning the pre-race race at the Clash at the Coliseum, and Cindric winning the opening race of the season, and then last week Chase Briscoe winning the race at was it Las Vegas or what was Phoenix? So I figured, okay, a Ford should get the job done this past Sunday. And no, that was simply not the case. Chevrolet ran the day, even when they started losing cars left and right. And that was one of the most unfortunate things about this race, right? There were so many Chevrolets leading throughout the race or up toward the front of the race with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Ross Chastain and Tyler Reddick and even Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott and ultimately William Byron. A number of Chevrolets that had a shot to do well in this race, but for whatever reason, if you were up toward the front, you're probably going to have a tire issue because Ricky Stenhouse Jr. had a tire go down. He went into the wall and caused a whole accident. And then Tyler Reddick, tire go down, goes in the wall. And then toward the end as well, and I think it was the end of stage 2, this is when Denny Hamlin, he makes a poor decision, gets into Kyle Larson. Kyle Larson ends up going into Chase Elliott's side door and then into the wall. It was a rough day to be a Chevrolet, unless your name was William Byron, who, of course, won the race as the third Hendrick driver of the year to win. And now the only guy who's outstanding, of course, is Chase Elliott. It was kind of a wild race, though. I don't necessarily know that I liked the race, but we'll kind of get into that in a second. It was basically like a mini Talladega, mini Daytona, in the way that it was ran, the way that they ran it, because of the repaving that took place about 6 or so months ago. And, like I said, it was one of those things where it was annoying to see all the Chevrolets go down, but ultimately speaking, the Chevrolets that could hold on, they rose to the top nonetheless, with William Byron winning the race. With Chase Elliott, he didn't win the race, but he finished, I believe, 6th, and so now he's leading the sport in points despite not winning a single race yet. I think it was a good race, but the funny thing about it is probably the worst race of the season thus far. Honestly, it's not much of racing, right? It's more of this, you get in the draft and then the draft takes you, right? And if you're not in the draft, you're not going to go far and you're going to fall back pretty fast. So it's not so much racing, but more so just getting in the wind stream and going the right direction. And to that extent, it's a whole heck of a lot more dangerous, it feels like, because, if we're going to run at Atlanta like we run at Daytona, like we run at Talladega, that's fine. But keep in mind, the reason Daytona and Talladega work is because they are massive tracks. So if there's an accident, cars can scatter and it doesn't matter, right? There's no concern about where they're going to go and are they going to hit something, because there's so much room. There's probably not going to be as much of an issue, potentially, unless it's, the big one, but there's usually not going to be as much of an issue because there's so much room to scatter and to get out of the way. And you might have a little bit of damage, but not the whole car being done for, right? Well, in this case, if you were behind an accident, this is a pretty narrow track. You don't have the room to scatter like you do at Daytona, like you do at Talladega, and so on. I think of a great example would be Chase Elliott toward the end of Daytona. He should have been in at least a couple of different accidents, but because he had so much room to avoid the accidents, he survived, right? And ultimately, these races that run a lot like Daytona and Talladega, it's a survive and advance approach. You don't really plan on running the race the best. You don't really know that you want to be at the front the entire race, but you want to just be in position to potentially win the race. You want to be a Bubba Wallace who had a shot to win at the end. You want to be a William Byron who did it at the end, a Ross Chastain, a Corey LaJoie who finished 5th place, actually, Chase Elliott at 6th. I believe Joey Logano was somewhere. No, he wasn't up there. Who was up there? Another 4. I think Blaney might have been up there. You want to be in position to maybe get there. You may not get there, but you want to be close enough. That's the whole point now, because now you know what's going to happen. You're going to have a restart with a few laps to go, and if you're in position, you could potentially get up there. Ultimately, going back to you need to get in the draft. So I think the race was fine. I didn't hate it. I didn't dislike it. I thought it was good. But again, I go back to there are some massive concerns that I had as a racing fan that seem to be echoed by other racing fans as well. There were some fans that love this race. I've already expressed my opinions, but I wasn't alone in the way that I see the race either. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. I believe they're going back to this track here in the fall. So we'll see as things change, and maybe as the track is run on, the differences of the paving might start to lessen a little bit more. But as far as next week, going over to the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, we call it COTA for short. This is a track we introduced last year, and last year's race, it made headlines for all the wrong reasons. If you recall, it was raining, and they still had the rain tires, and because it was a road course, they turn left, they turn right, they turn left, they turn right, they slow down. They said, okay, it's fine because they're not going all that fast anyway. They're going to have the rain tires, so they should have a good amount of traction, and it shouldn't be an issue. Well, then you had several accidents because the drivers could not see anything because there was rain and water from the track being pushed up on the windshields, and there was a pretty infamous moment where I believe Martin Truex Jr., he got into the back of somebody, and so he slowed down, and Cole Custer was coming behind him, and he did not see Martin Truex Jr. because there was so much rain and water on his windshield, and he goes right through Martin Truex Jr. Martin Truex Jr.'s car goes off the ground. Cole Custer's car ends up in flames. And suffice to say, there were a lot of bad situations from a safety standpoint at last year's race at COTA. Now, ultimately, Chase Elliott, he won the rain-shortened race. They ended up calling a little early. And the funny thing about it was, if you recall, he would have run out of gas, actually, had they not called the race short, and Kyle Larson probably would have won that race. So for folks like myself, I was begging for the race to end a little early, and luckily the rain was on our side that day. Of course, Elliott, his last two wins have come on road courses in the form of COTA and then also Road America on July 4th last year. Meanwhile, Kyle Larson, he won the other two road course races last year, not the other two, but two other road course races last year as well. So he should figure to do well this week. Joe Logano, he finished strong last year. Cindric and Allmendinger, they also did well in the form of road courses. So I figured they'll probably do well here in this moment as well. With all that said, I said several weeks ago, probably at the beginning of Daytona, that I would never pick Chase Elliott on this show because I didn't want to jinx him, because I have not picked a single winner yet this season. So I said, I don't want to jinx him. I don't want to screw it up for my guy. Now, granted, he has not won a race yet, so my formula has not exactly worked out to a T, but all three of his teammates have won races this year. William Byron, Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson. This is Chase's track. I know they've only run one race. That's hard to say 3 times fast. Run one race here, and Chase did it last year, and he succeeded. Chase is a road course king for a reason, and I see every reason as to why he should win this race this week. So I will go with Chase Elliott, and I'll say it's not even close. I'll say that he wins pretty handily to get his first win of the season, first win since July 4th of last year. So that is our show for today. Now, I know we have a lot more to come in the March Madness NCAA tournament, and trust me, hopefully I'm just begging that my bracket will hold on over the next few days. And if it doesn't, I'm sure we'll go through that next week as well. And if it does, trust I'll be bragging about it come next Wednesday. So either way, I encourage you to check out the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight this weekend. Feel free to check out Chase Elliott win at COTA this weekend, and also keep an eye on any NFL headlines for me. Feel free to send us a message on Instagram at Ball with Y'all Podcast. If you have any questions, any comments, anything you'd like to hear more about, feel free. Drop us a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. We'd love to hear more from you. You can also email us. Our email is in the description as well. However you would like to get in contact with us, we are here for it. So, like always, I appreciate your time. I hope you have a great Wednesday, and thank you for allowing us the opportunity to talk some ball with y'all.